By the time most women start questioning health advice, they've already done everything they were advised to do. They followed the plan. They cleaned up their diet. They exercised more consistently. And they tried to manage their stress better. And yet, something still doesn't add up. Then they begin to question their effort, their discipline, and their motivations. What almost never gets questioned is whether the model itself fits women's physiology. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because much of what women are told about metabolism, stress, longevity, and health is built on assumptions that were never designed around women's bodies in the first place. This episode isn't about blaming medicine. It's about understanding its blind spots. And more importantly, understanding your body. When we talk about standard health advice, dietary guidelines, exercise recommendations, metabolic targets, we tend to assume that those targets are neutral. They aren't. They're historical. For decades, medicine disproportionately studied men, not because women weren't important, but because women were considered complicated and complex. Hormone cycles were considered confounders. Pregnancy was viewed as a liability. Physiological variability was treated as noise. So male physiology became the default reference point. Many assumptions about metabolism, stress response, exercise tolerance, and even medication dosing were built around bodies that were hormonally stable and less cyclically responsive. This isn't an indictment of medicine. It's a limitation of the framework that it grew out of. But when women are given advice built on that framework, the mismatch doesn't show up as an academic problem. It shows up in real life. And when advice doesn't work, women don't assume that the advice is wrong at first. They assume they are. They assume they're inconsistent. They assume they lack discipline or knowledge. They assume they're doing something wrong. And this is where harm occurs. Because women are much more physiologically responsive to stress. So when the advice doesn't fit, the body reacts, often causing more symptoms or lack of resolution of the existing symptoms. Energy drops, sleep gets interrupted, moods shift, cycles change, cravings intensify, inflammation sometimes worsens. And women assume they just need to try harder. This creates a cycle of self-doubt because women are being asked to function in a system that does not account for their biology. This is where we need to talk about what metabolism really is. Metabolism isn't a number, it's not a calorie equation, and it's not a fixed rate. Metabolism is a response system, and in women, that response system is deeply sensitive to hormonal cycles, reproductive life stages, stress load, sleep quality, and nutrition. That means the same input can produce very different outcomes, depending on each individual woman's internal state. And advice that may work really well in one woman's life cycle may backfire in a later life cycle. But when health models assume linearity and neutrality, women seem unpredictable and complex. In reality, their metabolism is doing exactly what it's designed to do. It's adapting. The problem isn't the adapting. The problem is applying static advice to a dynamic system. One of the most common questions that women ask, sometimes with self-judgment, is this: why is my body not responding? Traditional Chinese medicine offers a very different and profound explanation. In TCM, or traditional Chinese medicine, the body is not viewed as a series of isolated systems. It's viewed as a holistic and dynamic network. Variation is expected. Rhythm is central. And it understands that everything is cyclic. TCM doesn't ask, what disease is this? It asks, what pattern is the body responding to? When you apply a pattern-based lens to women's physiology, women stop looking inconsistent and complex and start looking appropriately responsive. One of the most important principles in traditional Chinese medicine is this: women are of blood, or women are governed by blood, and men are of qi, or men are governed by qi. That doesn't mean that women don't have qi and men don't have blood. It means women's physiology relies more heavily on the quality, movement, and sufficiency of blood. They menstruate, reproduce, breastfeed. All of these functions that are unique to women are based in blood. In TCM, blood represents nourishment, grounding, emotional stability, immune regulation, and nervous system integrity. Here's the critical point. Stress both consumes blood and stagnates blood. In other words, it takes more blood if you have more stress. You tend to burn through more of the stuff that's in your blood, your vitamins, your minerals, your hormones. These are all consumed by stress. Stress is like you're sitting in your car with the engine on, with the transmission in neutral, but your foot's on the gas pedal. You're going to blow through a lot of gas that way. It's the same thing with stress and blood. Stress can also stagnate blood, and what that means is it can make circulation poor. So stress has deep impacts on blood. Now layer in menstruation. During childbearing years, women will menstruate once a month unless they're pregnant. So we lose blood cyclically. That's normal physiology. But actually, monthly menstruation as we know it today is actually historically new. For most of human history, women did not menstruate once a month. They had many pregnancies. The average woman just 200 years ago was having 7 to 8 babies. Back then, they had to breastfeed for years because there was no formula. There was no birth control. So they had long stretches without menstruation, which meant that they got to conserve their blood more than women in modern times today. So their cumulative blood loss over their lifetime was much less than ours today. Today, women may menstruate monthly for 30 years or more, often also while under chronic stress, overworking, undereating, underresting. From a TCM perspective, this represents a profound shift. Repeated blood loss, plus stress-induced blood depletion, and possibly blood stagnation. This creates vulnerability. And when blood becomes deficient or stagnant, women don't just get a little tired. They become more susceptible to mood disorders, autoimmune conditions, chronic inflammation, anxiety, depression, sleep interruptions, inflammation, and weight gain. That's not weakness, that's physiology. This is where traditional Chinese medicine and modern metabolic physiological observations align in a really important way. Stress doesn't just affect mood. It's not just about emotions. It reshapes metabolism and physiology. When blood is sufficient and flowing, a woman will experience better exercise tolerance, longer fasting windows, broader food ranges, and higher cognitive loads. They'll have more vitality. But when blood is depleted or stagnant, especially under chronic stress, that same woman can look very metabolically different. Foods that once nourished and stabilized now cause crashes. Exercise that once invigorated now causes exhaustion. Fasting that once felt invigorating now triggers anxiety or insomnia. From the outside, this looks like inconsistency, but from the inside, it's very predictable. This is why dynamic metabolic types are dynamic. Dynamic metabolic types aren't permanent. They reflect the current state of physiology and metabolism, especially stress load and blood status. Chronic stress can dramatically change someone's metabolic expression and physiology, which is why personalization isn't optional for women. It's essential. Now, there's another critical distinction that we need to make. Stress itself is not the problem. A healthy stress response helps the body to mobilize, stabilize, and recover. The issue is when adaptation becomes chronic and fixed. When stress is chronic, unresolved, or layered without adequate recovery, the body becomes stuck. Metabolism becomes stuck. There's no longer adaptive stress. Now there is pathological adaptation. The body is no longer responding to stress. Now it's organizing around it. From a Western medicine perspective, this looks like chronic sympathetic overload, impaired vagus nerve tone, altered cortisol signaling, even disrupted blood sugar or cholesterol regulation. From a TCM perspective, we call this chi stagnation, blood deficiency, and possibly blood stagnation. Different language, same phenomenon. This is the point where symptoms stop being subtle. Energy no longer returns with rest. Sleep stops becoming restorative. Mood becomes fragile. Inflammation becomes persistent. And most importantly, the body becomes less flexible. This is why women often say to me, I just don't feel like myself anymore. I just can't bounce back the same way anymore. That's not aging, and it's not weakness. It's not a lack of discipline. That's a system that has lost all ability to switch gears. And this is why stress explains so many of the symptoms women struggle with the most. Fatigue isn't about laziness. It's about energy being conserved by a weakened metabolism. Weight gain is not a lack of discipline. It's metabolic protection. Brain fog is not a loss of intelligence or cognitive function. It's a reduced cognitive bandwidth. Mood swings are not emotional instability. They're signs of a nervous system under sustained load. Sleep issues are not random. They're disrupted recovery signaling. These symptoms are not separate from stress. They're different expressions of the same underlying state, a body that has been organized around survival for far too long. And when we treat each of these symptoms in isolation, we miss the root cause entirely. This framework even explains why women tend to experience more medication side effects than men do. Women have higher rates of adverse drug events and side effects than men, not because we're overly sensitive, but because trials and medical studies centered around men's physiology. Add to that the stress, add to that the blood depletion, add to that hormonal cycling. What modern medicine calls side effects, TCM recognizes as predictable disruptions of blood, chi or vital energy, and shen or spirit. Again, this isn't a failure on the part of women or medicine. It's simply a structural mismatch. So what actually helps? When women are given a model that reflects their biology, everything changes. Food stops feeling like the enemy. Exercise stops feeling like punishment. Rest stops feeling useless. Instead of asking, what plan should I try next? The question becomes, what does my body need now? Rigid protocols fail women because they assume linearity. A dynamic system requires dynamic interpretation. This is why stabilization must come from optimization in a personalized way. Personalization matters. And this is why women don't just need more discipline or to try harder. They need a model that fits. If health advice has ever felt like it was written in a language your body didn't understand, it's not because you weren't listening. It's because the model didn't fit. Your metabolism and your body is actually working perfectly with what it has available to it in the moment and based on what it needs to adapt to in the moment. It's not inconsistent. It's responding intelligently to what's going on inside of it. And once you understand that, the path forward becomes clearer, not harder. That's where healing actually begins. Thank you for being here with me. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you know a woman who could benefit from this information, please share this with her. I'll see you in the next episode.